Again, thank you very much. Good afternoon. And first and foremost, I have to apologize. I did not put all the task partners on the slides, but my thanks goes out to all of you because without you, this would not have been possible. What I'm going to present you now is a selection of findings from this exit interview that we did. While the terminology may be a bit critical, I think, when we talk about elderly consumers. At the end of the clinical intervention, and we had the opportunity to do a paper-pencil questionnaire with all of the participants of the intervention and ask them on a couple of attitudes, perceptions, but also, and that's very interesting, understanding of nutrition knowledge, nutrition claims, and health claims. And as this is typically a very difficult segment of the general population to access for this type of survey, I think we're very fortunate to be able to gather these views. Yes. So we did two things. We had this survey that we did with the participants of the intervention, and after that we talked to GPs, dietitians, and two members of the Standing Committee of European Doctors to basically get their views on our results and whether this matches their experiences or whether this is completely contradictory to what they see, etc. And I will try and go through the most interesting results now, but there's many more, so just call me or email me and we can discuss all of this. The core of our survey was on attitudes and understanding of nutrition claims, health claims, but also testing people's nutrition knowledge. And we also wanted to look into the sources of information. So where do elderly consumers get their information? Who do they trust, etc.? And there's quite a bit of interesting findings that we'll get to in a minute. This sample overview you should have seen in the morning. This is really just the participants of the intervention. You have both the intervention and the control group and the different countries, so you can get back to that if you need more details on our sample. And for the interviews that we carried out afterwards, we had about 17 interviews in all of the countries where we held the interventions, the intervention centers, and 2 interviews with experts from the Standing Committee of European Doctors here in Brussels. So let's start right away with some of our findings. What we did is we administered an actual nutrition knowledge test, which we adapted from existing nutrition knowledge tests to specific requirements for the elderly. And we were able to see what is the objective nutrition knowledge score that they have after answering these questions, scoring them, and then splitting into high and low nutrition knowledge. So let's take a look. If you only look at the total, things look very balanced and even, but if you look at the countries, then you see quite a bit of differences, and they will follow us through this entire survey and the results. So it's quite interesting. You have the lowest nutrition knowledge, or the largest proportion of people with a low nutrition knowledge in Poland and also in Italy. With the Netherlands is a bit half-half, and then respondents from France and the UK, they scored relatively good on nutrition knowledge. So a larger proportion, a clearly larger proportion of respondents scored as a high nutrition knowledge. And this is something to kind of keep in mind because it will recur when we look at the following results. We also, of course, checked, is there a difference between intervention and control group? And we did not. Yes, we did, sorry. We did find that in the intervention group, the nutrition knowledge was significantly higher. When we looked at men and women separately, we still found that result. However, when we only looked at men and women across intervention and control group, we did not find a significant difference. And this is probably contrary to what some of the experts would have expected. The only thing that needs to be mentioned here is this is a cross-sectional measure. So we do not have the same measure from the beginning of the intervention. So we don't know whether the clinical intervention in New Age may have changed this or not. So this is one thing to keep in mind, that of course with this entire survey, this is a cross-sectional measure, and we do not have any results to say whether there have been changes because of the intervention. We don't know what part of the results that we have now in this survey are the result of the clinical intervention. So that's the only drawback here. But nevertheless, I think accessing this type of sample, as I've said before, is highly interesting because they're typically very difficult to incorporate into regular surveys. So when we then put forward these results to our experts, the GPs and dietitians in the countries where we actually had the interventions, they do agree, they concur with our findings. However, they were quite surprised that there was not a significant difference between men and women. The European Committee of the Standing Committee of European Doctors, they actually issued a pilot study on themselves, and apparently our findings are very much in line with theirs, which is good for the validity of our sample, of course. So now, having looked at how people scored on their nutrition knowledge, we asked them a couple of questions about their attitudes towards nutrition information on food labels and how they use these. The first thing that we asked them was, do you actually use the nutrition information on food labels when you purchase your food products? And you can see that there's quite a bit of variation between the countries, with the Italians clearly saying yes. And the Dutch being a bit more reserved and having only about 40%, but still more than those saying no or I don't know. Of those that said no or occasionally in this case, we asked them, well, if you don't use these food labels, on these nutrition labels, why not? And there, of those that had said no or occasionally, so keep in mind it's a smaller subsample, they said, well, because it's too much information. That was the clear response. About half of all of them said too much information. And that is something that will recur in additional findings that I'll show you in a second. So this was on whether people say that they use nutrition information on food labels. When we now looked at or compared the intervention and the control group, we say that we see a very nice result. We see that in the intervention group, people significantly more often reported that they use food labels. Now, we're hoping that, of course, this is a result of the intervention, but since, again, we do not have the pre-intervention measure, it could theoretically be that part of them would have said that before the intervention. We wanted to have a closer look at the country differences for those that said occasionally or no, meaning occasionally or never do they use nutrition information on food labels. And while you do see that the clear majority across all countries said because it's too much information, I think one interesting result also here is that I believe it's the Polish, about 40% said they had problems reading the nutrition labels. So I think in terms of country differences, this is quite a bit of additional information you can take out of these results. Now we asked them to rate on a verbal scale several aspects of nutrition information on food labels, and when it came to the amount of nutrition information, we see quite a bit of country differences. For instance, the majority of the British consumers say it's about enough, so they seem quite satisfied with it. So this is all self-reported. But we do see a good proportion of Italian consumers or Italian elderly consumers that say that there is not enough information on food labels. Far less so among the French consumers, who seem to think that there's actually too much information on labels. So you do see that the results between the countries do vary quite a bit in our New Age sample. Now we repeated this question. This time it's on the amount of nutrition information. We repeated it on the readability and whether people reported difficulties in reading nutrition information on food labels. And here we see a bit of a different picture. We see that the Polish and the French, they clearly report that they have difficulties reading nutrition information on food labels. Whereas the British, about a third or so, say that they find it quite easy to read. So you do have more pronounced country differences here as well. The Dutch consumers, again, about half of them, they say, no, I'm about okay, it doesn't need to be changed. So here it's really quite interesting to not look at the total results, but at the country basis of the results. Lastly, so the first one was amount of nutrition information. Here we looked at readability. And lastly, we asked them about the understanding, so the feeling of how well they thought they understood nutrition information on food labels. And here we see that the Dutch, they're very satisfied, they're very happy, they find it easy to understand, or they don't have anything to complain about. whereas, for instance, the French consumers, about half of the respondents said that they do find it very difficult to read and understand nutritional information on food labels. And I think, again, if you look at the country results or country by country results, then you have a lot of actionable findings that you can work with. We did, of course, check whether there were any differences between the intervention and the control group, and we did not find any differences, neither for when people reported their own understanding of nutrition information, nor when they reported how readable they thought that nutrition information on food labels was. And lastly, of course, we checked with our experts in the interviews after the survey on a local basis, but also with the CPME. And they do agree that in their experience, elderly consumers, while they do now pay more attention to nutrition labels, of course it's been colported in the media, it's been discussed heavily, they still are challenged by things such as too much information, illegible texts, and of course an uncertainty over how to interpret the information. And that is one of the challenges that we face when we look at elderly consumers. Our representatives from the CPME did indeed highlight that there is a need to ensure that labeling is clear and readable so that it can be accessed and understood by the elderly population. Now, we looked at attitudes towards nutritional information on food labels. We wanted to also see, at least from a self-reporting standpoint, what people said how they used food labels. And the first question we asked was an unprompted one. So we just said, thinking about the last 6 months, when you purchased food products, which of these pieces of information did you look for? And unprompted, the clear response across all countries, so this is on a total basis, the analysis was that the best before date at the very bottom received almost 60% of clicks. So they could tick as many of these aspects as they wanted to. This was then followed, however, with a certain difference. It's about 44% was sugars. So any indication about sugar content in a product. When you look at the two figures, health claims and nutrition claims, which are of special interest in this particular study, you see that they do not appear on people's mindset when they are not prompted about this topic. Now, we did slightly change the question, and we asked them, well, which of these factors do you think influence your purchase decision? Again, the top two ranking of 5 that they were allowed to pick are best before and price, which is something we do find regularly in other studies with general population samples. However, nutrition claims and health claims actually tripled in the number of respondents that tick those. So that's quite interesting that what they think influences their purchase decision does not necessarily match what they can recollect that they've looked for on food products when they purchase them. We did, of course, check this result with our GPs, dietitians, and the representatives of the Standing Committee of European Doctors. And the GPs and dietitians, they did indeed agree that best before and sugar content are, in their experience, very important pieces of information for elderly consumers when they purchase their food products. However, they also made a good point, and they said that nutrition health claims have not been on the market for a very long time. So this could also be that it's still a transition phase for elderly consumers to kind of get acquainted with this particular topic. Not so much nutrition information per se, but really the nutrition and health claims as such. And that is something that will take us to the core of our survey, which is where we tested actual understanding of nutrition and health claims. Let's start with the nutrition claims. We selected 6 that we thought were quite important and relevant for elderly consumers. And we gave them, for each nutrition claim, a multiple choice style response sheet. There was 1 right definition, there were 2 wrong definitions, and there was an I don't know option. These are the results. So for half of the nutrition claims, the majority of participants picked the wrong answer. A lot of times it was actually that they picked answers where we added an interpretive element to the nutrition claim, almost making it somewhat of a health claim. So they would go beyond what the mere nutrition claim states, for instance, low fat, as the product needs to be a certain percentage of fat that is the maximum so that that product can be labeled low fat, but they would go a step beyond and interpret that claim to a health outcome. So this is what you see across all countries right now. And you see that the small blue part is that very few only said, I don't know. So they would pick one of the definitions. But however, for two nutrition claims, no added sugar and lights, a clear majority picked the right definition. So I think that is an encouraging starting point. However, there's other nutrition claims, where we obviously have some more work to do. We again checked whether there were any differences between intervention and control group, and they did not differ. This also didn't change when we looked at each nutrition claim separately. We did find country differences. In the Netherlands and the UK, participants scored significantly higher. The Polish and Italian consumers scored lower, and the French participants scored somewhere in between. And overall, and I think that is a very encouraging result, nutrition knowledge from our nutrition knowledge test was positively correlated with how well all of the participants scored on these nutrition claims. So it does seem to have a positive effect that we can encourage through increasing nutrition knowledge among the elderly. And I think that is a very nice, tangible result from this study. When we also asked them, well, do you think this information on these nutrition claims is reliable? You have somewhat of a pronounced country difference here. The British consumers like to say no, very clearly, no. The Italian consumers seem to be at least very divided in their views, because roughly the same percentage says yes or I don't know, which is very distinct responses, but again, a similar distribution. And the same also held true for the Polish consumers. About the same percentage said yes and I don't know. So there seems to be quite a bit of potential that we can increase the positive responses. When we then also said, do you find this information helpful? So first we asked about the reliability of this information, but then we asked, well, do you find this information helpful in choosing your food? Then we do see that a clear majority says yes. Except for the British, where we still, again, have a rather large proportion of people just plain out saying no. But this is quite interesting finding, I think, that you do not have pronounced trends when you ask about the reliability of information. However, when people are asked about whether they think it's helpful for them choosing food, then you do have a clear tendency for people to say yes. We did check with our GPs, and we tried to really dull this down into the country differences. And yes, our British GPs could verify to us that British consumers often perceive nutrition claims not to be true. They are rather skeptical. They don't know what information to trust. There is a lot of contradictory information that is colported in the media. So this does support the findings that we have on a country level. The Polish GPs also could verify some of our findings, because they said that those that are aware of these claims say that they definitely affect their food choice. And we will later on see that they also have a higher trust in authorities that issue these claims. Across all the countries, the GPs and dietitians agree that education is the absolute key here. And that goes back to our nice finding that nutrition knowledge was positively correlated with how well study participants did on this test of understanding nutrition claims. Our representatives of the Standing Committee of European Doctors pretty much issued the same concern. They said education of students and junior doctors is very crucial. They need to be up to date. They need to have access to all of the medical information, the latest research, to be able to give the best possible advice to their clients. So they kind of look at it from the other side, but they again focus on and highlight the importance of education, continuous education. Now, we did the same thing for health claims. We also selected 6 health claims that were rather relevant to the elderly population, and we again gave people answer options, as in a multiple choice test. We had 1 right definition, we had 2 wrong definitions, and we had a I don't know option. I find this result a bit more encouraging because more people, a larger proportion, actually ticked the right answer. However, what we also see is that on average about 20% of respondents rather said I don't know than ticking any of the definitions. So there is still a good proportion of where we can tackle lack of understanding, lack of certainty maybe also when it comes to health claims. So this is across all countries, but then we of course also looked at more pronounced differences. We checked whether control and intervention group differed, and here they did not differ. One exception, however, and this takes me back to the slide, is the helps maintain strong bones. And here, the majority, or participants from the intervention group, were more likely to pick the wrong answer. We would, of course, have to dive more into detail as to why this would have been the case and what the characteristics of the respondents were that picked the wrong answer, but this is the most out of order finding that we have when it comes to health claims. Again, nutrition knowledge was positively correlated with how well participants scored on this test, but the correlation was less pronounced than it was for the nutrition claims. Again, we also then asked people, well, do you trust the scientific evidence behind these health claims? Because that is a recurring issue in the public debate when it comes to health claims. And again, you see some nice country differences. The Polish and the Italian consumers, they clearly say, yes, we do. And the British respondents said no. That was a recurring theme, and that is repeated in a lot of the responses that we got from the GP interviews. We also asked them, well, do you find this information helpful in choosing your food products? Again, we wanted to see what about the trust that they have in this information and whether they actually think they're going to use it to choose their food products. And again, similar to the trust question, we see Polish and Italian consumers say yes, of course, whereas a majority of the British consumers says no. And of those that say no or said no in this question, we said, well, if you don't think that this is helpful in helping you choose food products, those that said no said because I don't trust in the claimed effects. So the results in itself are very coherent. When we checked with, should I? Okay. I will skip right to the last part. We also wanted to see where people, elderly consumers, access information, which sources they trust, and which are the channels that we can use to improve, increase, and foster education. So this is really, this makes the survey actionable in terms of its findings. And when we generally said, well, where do you in general look for nutrition information, and we didn't prompt them about anything, then the 2 most pronounced answers that people ticked were food labels, which is a good start, and books and magazines on health. So this is what they said when you just asked them, well, where do you in general look for nutrition information? No prompting, no focusing on any specific aspects. Now, when we said, well, which one of these are the 3 most trusted sources? Then the picture already slightly changes, and the first 3 positions are dietitian, books and magazines on health, as before, and at the doctor's practice. And this, of course, gives us a great starting point to say, okay, these are the 2 contact points at the dietitian and the doctor's practice, where you can use the direct touch point with the consumer, with the patient, to help foster information about health and nutrition claims and general nutrition information. And then last but not least, of course, when we said, well, when you have a very specific diet-related health question, who do you ask for advice? And the number 1 response here was the doctor, followed by the dietitian, and then, of course, family and friends. So again, this gives you a clear indication of where you need to start to tackle any lack of information and education about health and nutrition topics. We checked for the participation effect. The Dutch said that the majority of the Dutch said, no, it has not changed any of my behavior. I still do what I did before. Whereas the Polish and Italians again said, yes, it has changed it. And I look for food labels more often now. And we also found that significantly more people in the intervention group said yes than in the control group, which I think is a positive result. This is something we wanted to achieve. And with this, I will say thank you. Once again, I need to also include all of our task partners here. I apologize that was an oversight. Thank you again. And yes, if you have any questions, I think in the coffee break is probably the best to approach me, yell at me, email me, call me. There's many more, much more to talk about.
Yes, we are on terrible. Thank you.